what do you think Biden is actually going to be remembered for his 4 years in office?
Well, that's it. Joe Biden is a footnote. Joe Biden is someone who will be remembered as a one-term president. Of course, those are pretty rare in the modern era of American politics. Bill Clinton won re-election. H.W. Bush, of course, goes down as someone who, despite his many accomplishments, is a one-term president. And Joe Biden is someone who had always wanted this office. I mean, he ran for president 4 times, each time doing not that great until really he got to South Carolina on the final push. And he was pushed forward by Jim Clyburn and others who in the Democratic leadership who were worried about running radical against Donald Trump. He wasn't run because Joe Biden had the vision and the Democratic Party backing to really change America, to be someone like Barack Obama, who was pushed forward as an agent of change, to be someone like Trump, who was a self-styled agent of change. He was someone who was put there to defeat Donald Trump, and he was able to do it once. He thinks he could have done it the second time, but all of the polls and strategists seem to think completely differently from him on that. I mean, if you read some of his obituaries, his political career obituaries today in the New York Times, they're saying, well, he was wrong on a number of things. He was wrong on immigration, which of course is funny because the New York Times was so thoroughly supportive of him. He was someone who is going to symbolize where the Democratic Party has to take a turn away from some of these different things. He's also going to be remembered as someone, though, who kind of ended the neoliberal consensus that government ought to be small. Now, Barack Obama, of course, did a massive amount of this. He took over about a fifth of the U.S. economy with Obamacare. But Joe Biden was someone who pushed for a really muscular government involvement in our day-to-day lives. That's something that could potentially stick around. But it's almost tragic. It's like almost Kennedy-esque in its tragedy. He wanted, more than anything in life, the presidency of the United States of America. When he finally got it, he really wasn't there to even enjoy the fruits of his labor. He was someone who, for his trials, for his victory, for finally achieving it, he wasn't there, and he was eventually ejected by his party, literally. And at the end of the day, those same journalists who told us that he was going to be the warm embrace and a return to normalcy are nowhere to be found. Those vaunted American historians, presidential historians who claimed that he was next FDR, well, they're being really quiet right now. Over the last 4 years, thank God, voices like John Meacham have finally been marginalized and ignored to the level that they really ought to have been as just partisan hacks who have lazy sentence structure. These people who supported Joe Biden, who backed him, who built a legend around his administration, are nowhere to be found. And at the end of the day, after he gave that big, this is my final foreign policy speech, and despite being so traditionally wrong on foreign policy, he really does consider himself foreign policy aficionado. At the end of his speech, the best that they could muster was a foreign policy article that said he, quote, meant well. That's not exactly something that you want to be remembered as when you're the president. You want to be someone who does good, who does well. And that's not how it is. So at the end of the day, he got the office, and he ended up just being the most powerful placeholder. And even then, just for a time.
Chris, so true. I mean, we can't emphasize enough the extent to which he's always been this ham-fisted moron. And that's what he's been known as, you know, in all seriousness, right, for a long time. And then you saw this kind of two-bit corruption that almost became sexy by the way in which it had to be hidden, because they did, in fact, rally around him to be president. But this is someone who, isn't even particularly ideological, who takes in a few $1 million for his family from China. God knows what other countries. I mean, it really is disgusting. But I want to say two things. One is, we do have to acknowledge that one of the ironic achievements, right? Like you said, it's like a fairy tale curse. You become president, but you lose your marbles and your party kicks you out. But one thing he did do at the end is he did give it a little FU to everyone who put him there, right? I mean, we do, by all accounts, have him going with Kamala over anyone else and making damn sure that he had some kind of agency on the way out. I don't know what we think about that as a legacy. And then number two, how do you think that other people will remember him? In other words, will the mainstream media, as you point out in the piece, will this become the dominant narrative? Like, will everyone just admit how bad he was moving forward, or will they cover that up?
I think that they'll kind of admit it. He'll have a Carter-esque legacy because he's someone who let them down in the end. I read one mainstream corporate outlet who said that Joe Biden was someone who ran over and over again, senator, vice president, defeated, came back, and he's not someone who's ever known how to say goodbye. He's never known when it was time for him to leave. They called it his Irish goodbye, finally, that he was gone. And that's something more than any people that Democrats cannot abide, is someone who loses them power. And Joe Biden's unwillingness to allow for a campaign, unwillingness to allow for new blood, unwillingness to, until it's dragged into the spotlight on the debate stage, but unwillingness to face the reality of his own mortality, is someone who's cost them power in a major way. Not only do you have Donald Trump back in office, but you have Donald Trump, Obi-Wan Kenobi style, more powerful than ever before. Donald Trump now backed by a broad array of technologists, big business, and intellectuals who really know what they're doing, as opposed to, well, you probably would have had Donald Trump won re-election or succeeded to the presidency in 2020. You would have had an inward-looking and paranoid second administration, one that was the same way he kind of ran that campaign, was correctly understanding that the whole world was out to get him, but because of that, was insular, paranoid, and self-focused, like you saw in his 2020 campaign, which is so markedly different from 2024. It's kind of, if you're a believer in providence, as I am, you notice throughout all biblical history that God doesn't use powerful people to his ends. He strikes them low. You could be the assistant to the Pharaoh, but he's not going to use you to free the Jews. He's going to send you out in the desert until you're an old man, someone who's been cast out without any position of authority before he sends you back in to use you. And Donald Trump had that time in the desert where the GOP turned on him, speeches from the floor. People like Mitch McConnell found their courage to attack him. Republicans thought he was in the rear view. And then he rose up, survived an assassination attempt, came back even stronger. So I think Joe Biden will not have nearly as long of a post office career as someone like Jimmy Carter did, where he had the time for that really to sanitize and Democrats to look back fondly on someone who, despite his many flaws, was probably a pretty good person. Joe Biden's not going to have that time to sanitize. So, well, I'm sure they will remember him with the classic Washington, D.C. tradition of 3, 4, 5 funerals and a whole big parade when he does fell off his mortal coil. For now, he's persona non grata to a certain level. And they, to your point, have doubled down on that. He and his wife are bitter. They're angry. It was wild to watch the body language at Jimmy Carter's funeral, when you had Joe Biden and his wife who don't like Kamala and Doug, who don't like Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton there who doesn't like anyone, Barack Obama, who could have been a very meddlesome post-presidency president, but instead seems to just be kind of laughing at the whole thing. He's done his job. He's out. He's got his house in the vineyard and his place in Hawaii, and wants nothing to do with these people chuckling in the corner with Donald Trump. There's so much infighting, so much personal animosity in that crew of Democratic leadership. It was wild to actually really catch it on camera. I wish we had a microphone.
I'm never going to forget Jill Biden and the red that she was wearing on Election Day. But now let's look at justice right now, because it's confirmation hearing season, and Pam Bondi was up today in front of the Senate. She's Donald Trump's pick for Attorney General. So let's go ahead and take a look at her.
Like the president, I believe we are on the cusp of a new golden age where the Department of Justice can and will do better if I am confirmed. Lastly, and most importantly, if confirmed, I will fight every day to restore confidence and integrity to the Department of Justice and each of its components. The partisanship, the weaponization will be gone. America will have one tier of justice for all.
There were several appointees that were going to in front of the Senate today. But what was your main takeaway from this one? This one's kind of the biggest one of the day.
Well, I think Democrats decided that they were probably not going to land that many punches on her. So you saw a lot of her hearing was a combination of attacking the nominee to head the FBI and attacking Donald Trump. And every Democrat, really, except for Mazie Hirono, who may be the Senate's least gifted senator, got that memo and wasn't attacking her. And the only thing that people really went at her, after her on was trying to elicit assurances that she would not try to investigate or punish any of the awful actors inside of our federal government over the last 8 years, any of the saboteurs of the Trump administration, any of the persecutors of political opponents. And she refused to give them that. I mean, Republicans went with a bold strategy here, kind of a lightning strike strategy, where because of some complete incompetence and paper screw-ups in the transition team and among the committees, they ended up with only one hearing yesterday for Pete Hegseth. So all Democrat fire could be focused on him. And even then, it was a discordant, disorganized attack. Everyone seems to go it their own way. The Democrats came off looking bad, and Pete Hegseth essentially secured the nomination. He would need 3 Republicans to vote against him. I think he's not going to end up having that problem. And then they're a little bit more tired. They don't have the energy to go after it. And Donald Trump's early push for nominees, early listing of people, and putting up folks who, by and large, are pretty qualified for this position, for their positions, seems to have sapped some of the Democrats' energy and will play in their favor.
Well, Chris, I hope she gets in easy, and I hope we see her really clean house from the get-go. We will be watching that very closely. I want to talk about one thing before we have to break soon here that Jill and I were talking about earlier, and that's kind of interesting. The Washington Post is reporting that Vivek is being encouraged by Donald Trump to take J.D. Vance's Senate seat, or that Trump is pushing that. And that's sort of funny to me because a long, long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, that was the plan for Vivek. I mean, I thought he was going to run for Senate in Ohio, or when it became clear he would be a front runner to be appointed or run for that position. This is Washington Post. What do you think about this?
About 60 seconds, Bedford.
Vivek's a gifted orator, and he's certainly a pit bull. But his explosion on Twitter and his basically essential silence on social media and in public circles since is because he really stepped in it with the H-1B discussion he's not actually in line. And he seems to have exposed himself with a lot of people for what I think he always has been, which is someone who's very interested first and foremost in fame and in personal advancement. So he's soured a lot of people. And Donald Trump was one of the original people who really couldn't stand him, but has since obviously he's grown on him. He's been a loyal soldier. I could see that happening in the end, but I'm kind of doubtful that Governor DeWine and the larger MAGA support are going to end up lining up behind him. I mean, if it happens, then he'll get that support, but I still think it's a long shot.
Bedford, thanks so much. We'll catch you again tomorrow.
See you then.
Matthew, when you look at Vivek, you have some thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, Chris said it, not me. Tell me what you really think. I think it was well said. I mean, I think Vivek, very quickly found the limelight and appeared to enjoy it. There's nothing wrong with that. He's a good talker, and boy, he talked his way up into the highest of heights. So I do see this as a little bit of a correction for him going silent for some of the things he disastrously said on Twitter. We can talk about another time, but he's still very talented, and it'd be great if he got. Get a real job again, go to the Senate. That'd be perfect for someone like him. So I think he's hugely talented, but I do think this sounds like a little bit of a correction. And I don't know to what extent we're going to see him with Doge now.
Yeah, he talked enough to make Susie Wiles say, everybody else can't say anything else.
No more tweeting.